Okay, good evening. Some interesting sports news. So, if you follow Liverpool Football Club, you will know that their owners yesterday completed the $900 million takeover of the Pittsburgh Penguins in the NHL. And the NHL has got a lot of talking points right now with a rise in COVID cases. Two AHL teams have been shut down. An OHL team in the junior leagues has been shut down in Canada, and the NHL is tightening the COVID protocols, sort of similar to what we saw last season. And so that is very interesting. But the Fenway Sports takeover is very, very interesting with the Pittsburgh Penguins. That means our Fenway Sports Group owns the Boston Red Sox and the Boston Red Sox affiliates, Liverpool Football Club, Fenway Roush Racing in NASCAR, and now the Pittsburgh Penguins. So very, very interesting to see what happens going forward with that. So if you're an NHL fan, what do you make of it? Ellen White has broken the England goal scoring record for women in tonight's World Cup qualifier. So that's very, very interesting. And then obviously the death of Sir Frank Williams the other day is the end of an era in F1. The last privateer team to win the World Championship. That is obviously very, very interesting. And obviously, I will be doing a video on the history of the Williams F1 team at some point. They've had some great world champions. They've great world championships, and they've had great success, constructors, race wins, podiums. Possibly the greatest privateer team in F1 history. So there is that. But no, the Fenway Sports Group takeover, Mario Lemieux and Brian Burke will retain their positions within the hockey operations. Mario Lemieux and his consortium will still remain part of the ownership group. It's just added investment. So don't expect any changes there. But no, the NHL is very, very concerned about the rising case numbers. I'm very surprised over here in Europe, in European football, we haven't had the rise in cases. But rugby union has been affected, with several teams stuck out in South Africa who play in the United Rugby Championship, former Pro League. Zebra, Munster, and Cardiff have basically been stuck out in South Africa. Players are testing positive. So that's a really interesting dynamic. Will that affect European rugby? I think it will. I think there will be postponements to fixtures and rearranging of fixtures in the coming days. Yes, we are doing okay. Got some bits and pieces to do this evening, paperwork wise, to deal with my tax, which is fun. Tax is fun. Tax is just so fun. I'm having issues with my income tax, and I'm having issues with my local authority council tax, which is so much fun. It's costing me a fortune, which is just ridiculous. But I'll be interested to see what North Americans feel about the Fenway Sports Group buying the Penguins. Obviously, they own the Boston Red Sox. And Dan, I know you're a Major League Baseball fan, so it'd be very, very interesting to see what your thoughts are on the Fenway Sports Group, FSG, buying the Penguins in the NHL, considering they are a Boston-based business with the Red Sox. And obviously the Boston Bruins being a big rival of the Pittsburgh Penguins in the NHL. That'd be very, very interesting. I honestly, looking at the Pittsburgh, I don't really know. It's an interesting one. I mean, look, they bought Liverpool Football Club, obviously, over here in the UK a few years back, and that's brought renewed success to Liverpool. They've obviously owned the Red Sox, and they've run the Red Sox now for a while. And again, brought renewed success. They have Fenway Roush Racing in NASCAR, which is a very successful team. That's got a great history of success in race wins and championships in the various NASCAR classes, from the Cup Series all the way down to the Truck Racing Series and the support program. They also have involvement in the IndyCar as well, I believe, does Fenway Roush. So they're not out of their depth when it comes to sport ownership. Why the Penguins? I have no idea. Honestly, I don't know why they chose the Penguins. There are several other teams that maybe the Mario Lemieux based ownership are going, look, we don't have the funds to go it alone anymore. And they were putting out feelers to potential investors and co-owners. Mario Lemieux and his consortium retained some ownership of the Penguins. It's just one of them. I don't know why the Penguins was chosen by Fenway Sports. I'm not really sure what the fan reaction will be, but it adds extra financial stability to a team that has, off the ice, had instability for for many years. Not recently, but in its history, there were concerns that there were money problems with the team. Um, you know, Even after they won their first two Stanley Cups, there was the team was basically bankrupt. Mario Lemieux steps in as a player owner towards the end of his career and stabilised the franchise. They were basically broke, and they are a team that until yesterday relied on getting into the playoffs to turn a healthy profit. Maybe COVID's had an impact where their profit margins have been massively impacted. Um, yeah, well, you're a Red Sox fan, so obviously you will have some kind of feedback on how that team does. I mean, I'm not a massive Major League Baseball fan. I watch the occasional game, but since Fenway Sports has owned the Red Sox, they've had success. They've won a few World Series. They're regularly in the playoffs. That kind of, they're regularly at the top end of the standings. But before Fenway Sports took over, the Red Sox couldn't win anything. Big major fan base, but they couldn't win the World Series. Fenway Sports come in; they've had a great period of success with the current ownership. Liverpool again couldn't win the league title for 30 years. Fenway Sports, that's changed. Um, why the Penguins? I don't know the reasoning behind it, but the Penguins is one of those teams that has limited financial resources compared to some of the other franchises in the NHL, um, with ownership value. Um, so this injection of money and new investment will mean only positive things. I think more stability off the ice. No plans to change coach or GM or any of the hockey operations. It's a very successful team. They've only been out of the playoffs, I think, once or twice since Sidney Crosby's been a player there. So they've only, I think, missed the playoffs twice with Sidney Crosby in the team. That's a very long run in the playoffs. Obviously, in recent seasons, their playoff form has dipped, and they are possibly going to have to go through a rebuild or a retool at some point. Um, but in saying that, they are still a very, very successful team on the ice. It's off the ice they need more stability. Mario Lemieux brought a fair bit of stability with his ownership group, but that added investment brings added stability, and uh, you know we'll have to see what the Fenway Sports Group plan is for the team. Whether there's a rebrand or a logo change or a jersey design change, most likely there's no likelihood of the team being moved. Um, Not if you're pumping in 900 million just to move the team to another location. The NHL has no appetite to move any teams right now. Um, but we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. I mean, obviously, the NHL operates with a salary cap. Major League Baseball doesn't. It operates with a luxury tax. Um, the, the English football operates with a financial fair play system where losses cannot exceed profits by like 135%. There's a rule in place where you are going to make a loss or spend big, you have to be within a threshold of spending. But again, there's no salary cap. NASCAR, there's no salary cap or funding cap. Some teams don't have the same financial clout as other teams do. Um, so they operate in sports that have very different financial constraints, and the NHL is the only sport that they are now operating in that has a salary cap in place. So it'll be very interesting to see what the Fenway Sports Group plan is. Why they've chosen the Penguins, I don't know the full reasons behind that. Um, they could have chosen any of the NHL franchises, to be honest, to become part owners of. Um, I am surprised they didn't buy out the Bruins and the Jacobs family, if I'm being brutally honest. Thoughts on Max Neuer saying the Mets? Oh, this is the thing, because some leagues have higher salary caps over others. Um, the NHL is out of the four major leagues the lowest average salaries, and that's to do with the TV deal primarily. And you know, NFL, bigger stadiums, you can get more fans in, so you make more money off gate receipts for one. Bigger TV deal two. Um, so you know, Major League Baseball no salary cap. The NBA smaller squad sizes, so they are the best paid athletes in the world for average salary. Um, so LeBron James's contract is ridiculous, for example. Conor McDavid is not the top paid player, I don't think, in the NHL. I'm not quite sure on that. Um, but there is a lot of economic reasons why the NHL at the major leagues in the US and Canada has a lower top end salary and a lower average salary. You've got bigger rosters for one. Uh, the TV deal is worth less money in the US. So that has an impact. The NFL and the NBA have better TV deals, which are worth more money, um, and they have higher attendances because an NBA court is smaller than an ice rink for ice surface, so you can get more seats inside an NBA game, so more fans can technically be in attendance. The NHL is more reliant on gate receipts for profits, and it was, uh, I don't live in Buckinghamshire anymore. I now live in Berkshire again, but it did snow over the weekend. Not as much as it could have. The snow was heavier further north, um, but it did snow down in Wokingham for about 4 hours. It actually snowed on Saturday night for a little bit as well. Got caught in a little snow flurry doing Chinese deliveries with my friend. Um, but the weather's not had the major impact on sport that I thought it would. Only one Premier League game called off this weekend, Burnley Tottenham. When that's going to be replayed, we'll have to wait and see when that match is refixtured. You know, but the thoughts on Max Schneider. I mean, because the NHL, the salary cap being a lot lower, the TV deal being worth less money, more reliant on gate receipts. Um, Not every single team in the NHL is actually as profitable as the NHL would like. Only a couple now are struggling to turn a profit. Um, Whereas the NFL and Major League Baseball is a license to print money, and the NBA as well. Um, some of the NHL franchises are not worth as much as you think for value. There's a lot of reasons why, and then you've got to look at what US in Canada the NHL sells itself. But you've got to look what the US watches as a market, and certain locations the NHL struggles to attract the fan base. It's growing, obviously. The US collegiate system and the US development program is US national side and the NHL in general are reaping massive rewards from the massive development of the game in newer locations. But in saying that, again, new TV deal signed this year. The league was badly affected financially by the shutdown in 2020 and by a disrupted, shortened season last season, where they only played from January until the Stanley Cup final. Obviously, there's concern about going to the Winter Olympics with the rise in positive test results. Obviously, the pandemic. Two teams have been completely shut down this season. Other teams have been badly affected this season. Two AHL affiliate teams have been shut down. An OHL team has been shut down. So there are concerns over the existing protocols that are looking likely to be strengthened by the NHL. They may return to the taxi squad type system or stricter protocols when it comes to players socialising away from the game. You know, tighter, stricter protocols. We know there's a handful of players that are refusing to vaccinate. I always use Tyler Bertuzzi as the example because Detroit played a lot of games early in the season so far in Canada and he wasn't available, so he missed a lot of games. I think he misses. I think it's about 15, 16 games this season he will miss because of not being vaccinated. And should Detroit make the playoffs in the East, you've got Toronto in there. You have, the Montreal Canadiens and Ottawa Senators don't look likely to make the playoffs, but 3 out of the 7 Canadian teams play in the Eastern Conference, and should Detroit make the playoffs and have to play in Canada, Tyler Bertuzzi will not be playing the Canadian games basically. So there is that to consider. The NHL hasn't brought in compulsory vaccinations for players. Other leagues are looking at no vaccine, no play. That is a very difficult discussion to have at this time. in that kind of regard. The vaccine status of players. Um, Other leagues are facing this issue as well. The NRL has got at least I think 11 players that are refusing to vaccinate. That's creating a lot of problems down in Australia. It's a very difficult thing to juggle between freedom of choice and restricting uh, people's freedom of choice, basically. I am surprised that over in Europe, when it comes to especially European football and other sports, we haven't seen as many positive cases, considering this new variant that's about. But in rugby union, as I say, three of the United Championship rugby teams, one from Ireland, one from Italy, and one from Wales, are stuck in South Africa. They're not allowed to leave South Africa. There are positive tests. Another team managed to get home. Um, so um, that in itself is interesting. Well, we'll have to see if the Winter Olympics goes ahead yet. Because if a player tests positive, that's a 3-week quarantine. 3-week quarantine, 21-day quarantine. That's going to be imposed for a 2-week tournament. So that is a very difficult question. We may not see the NHL players go. We may not see any hockey players go to the Olympics at this rate. Whether I mean the NHL has until I think early January, it's about a month, about 5 weeks to a month to basically decide if they are going to go or not. So if a decision is made to pull out, they're running out of time quite quickly. Actually, 5 weeks will fly by very quickly. Which hockey team am I most looking forward to seeing? That's a difficult one. Denmark have qualified for their first Olympics. Qualified for the Olympics. I like watching the Finns and the Swedes play. I'm really interested to see how they're going to play. US, Canada are the two favourites going into the Olympics. So it's the Czechs always have a solid side. Germany are rising as a force again. The Slovaks have a decent team. The Latvians have a decent team. So for me, I'm just looking forward to watching it. Plain and simple. But that's if we actually have the Winter Olympics take place. We saw what happened with Tokyo delaying by a year, and the NHL, especially as the biggest league in the sport, I think it is the first week of January. Um, so they're running out of time to make a decision. If they are concerned about rising cases and tightening the protocols, they have to obviously also be aware that if a player tests positive over in Beijing, that's a 3-week quarantine. And imagine if Conor McDavid or Austin Matthews goes down, or John Tavares or Mark Scheifele, Connor Hellebuck, any number of star players. And I'm using Canadian teams for that one because I obviously follow more of the Canadian teams simply because of the divisions and all that. But in theory, can you imagine Sidney Crosby or Ovechkin coming down with the virus or having to isolate? That could damage their team's playoff chances. And the teams that I've mentioned, Edmonton, Toronto, Winnipeg, uh, Pittsburgh, and Washington, they all are in playoff spots right now. What's my thoughts on players from the NRL moving to the Super League? Does it ruin the English rugby? The Super League's got enough problems. It doesn't matter that NRL players are coming over here or Super League players going over there because freedom of movement and rugby league wants to grow its global presence. The problem is that the TV deal over here in the UK isn't great. I know Channel 4 have signed an agreement with the Super League for 10 live regular season and 2 postseason games. It's 12 games in total. That's not a massive deal. The Sky deal, Sky TV deal isn't enough. But if the London Broncos are going part time, that says that there's money issues within the game. The Toronto Wolfpack and Ottawa Races experiment has been a costly failure and was badly thought out and not really thought out properly. So I don't think it necessarily ruins the English rugby league. I think the issue is grassroots participation, growing the game in the Midlands and the south of England, trying to grow the game in Wales, again, trying to grow the game in Scotland if they can. I know the Ottawa Races are now relocated to Cornwall. They originally were in Hemel Hempstead, so we've lost a team from the southeast, moved them to Canada, never played a game, and moved them to the southwest. And Cornwall is a rugby union heartland, basically. It's the main sport played in the county, but Cornwall is one of the poorest areas of the UK, sparse population. And it's a long distance to travel for the rest of the teams. Even London Broncos, for example, and London Scholars, that's still like a 4 or 5 hour uh, car ride. You know, 4 or 5 hours on the train. So for away fans getting there and for Cornwall playing the games, um, mostly with teams from Lancashire and Yorkshire, that's travel costs are going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. But there's grassroots development, TV deal, the exposure. I don't think the NRL players coming over here necessarily ruin the English game. The best English players play in the NRL. So, and with expansion coming in 2023, I could see some more Super League talent going over to Australia to fill the talent gap, because there's always that concern that you're spreading the talent too thin. You dilute products. If the best Super League players of British and French origin decide to go over to Australia, I wouldn't be surprised. The NRL is probably going to go to 18 teams by the time the next TV deal arrangement. So there's that one. Juve or AC Milan, who's the bigger club? Juve has the bigger fan base, but Juve are currently under investigation for some very interesting accounting over the last couple of years, and could be stripped of one of their last title, and they could be um, relegated from Serie A if the competition watchdog basically is found in favour. Juventus are in trouble. And now we see why Juventus want to push this European Super League, because they could be thrown out of Serie A basically and stripped of titles and heavily fined. Same with Barcelona and Real Madrid; they've got money problems. So the reason why these three clubs are still trying to push this European Super League, I haven't let the idea go, is they have problems. They're either under investigation for corruption, or they've just run out of money. Do I support a team in rugby league or prefer just one? I'm a Canberra Raiders fan. I have a soft spot for the London Broncos just because I live in the southeast, and they're the biggest club in the southeast of England. Having played in the Super League, having played in the Challenge Cup final, I like the London Broncos. I have a soft spot for the underdog. I also like the Canberra Raiders because when I'm growing up, you've got Mal Meninga, you've got Laurie Daly, you've got Ricky Stewart, Glenn Lazarus. So some immortals played for the Raiders, and future immortals played for the Raiders for both Queensland and New South Wales. Brilliant side in the 80s and 90s. I grew up watching the 90s team, one of the best teams ever to take the field. And to be fair, for me, the Raiders are a little bit of an underdog in the NRL, simply because of the way the salary cap works, where the money's in Sydney, the nightlife's in Sydney and Brisbane. So they really are an underdog. They do sometimes struggle to attract that talent that some of the other clubs, get to do. But I'm a bit of a Raiders fan. I like an underdog, but they weren't always underdogs. But at the moment, they are, in my eyes, underdogs with the squad they have, and trying to attract talent. And Canberra is a bit of a boring city, to be honest, as cities go. But they've had some pretty talented players come through their youth setup. They've had some superstar players obviously play for the team. Recently made a grand final and a semi final. So yeah, I like the Canberra Raiders. I always have. I like the Green Machine. Just is what it is. If Messi won the Ballon d'Or for coming third in La Liga and winning Copa America, do you think Ronaldo should have won it in 2019? Yeah. I like the Ballon d'Or is now just a personality contest. I think there are better players on the list. That I think Lewandowski, how hasn't won the Ballon d'Or in the last back-to-back seasons is beyond me. Messi's even said he should have won. I don't know how the Ballon d'Or voting process works. I remember when players like Figo and Ronaldinho and creative midfield players, or all-round players were the one. It wasn't necessarily all the goal scoring records. This is why I think football is less talent, is a lower standard now than what it was 20 years ago. Winning the Ballon d'Or 20 years ago, it didn't matter what position you played. Goalkeepers have won it. Defensive midfielders have won it. Defenders have won it. Strikers have won it. At the moment, the Ballon d'Or is a popularity contest. Messi isn't playing well this season. Ronaldo isn't playing well this season. When Modric won it, that was brilliant because it was a change in direction. There's been a lot of criticism of the way the system works for the Ballon d'Or. Some other great players have won it only once. Some other great players never won it at all. Um, so yeah, the Ballon d'Or, how the process works with how they work out who's won what, and who how the voting process works. If the winner is coming out and saying the guy who finished second should have won it for the last 2 seasons, that tells you the system isn't working. That tells you something's not right. Does Messi still win the Ballon d'Or if he stayed at Barcelona? I don't know. He's won it going to PSG, and he's not in sparkling form of PSG. Um, in a league that is far less competitive than what he's just left. I couldn't tell you how Suarez hasn't got it, or Lewandowski, or Koke for how he runs how he ran the athletic home midfield. Oblak in goal, Donnarumma, um, you know, any of the Italian players that won the Euros, any of the England players that got to the final. How Lewandowski hasn't got it. It does make you question the voting process behind the Ballon d'Or. It's basically a popularity contest, pretty, in my opinion. Whether he won it or not, if he stayed at Barcelona, is a different question. Um, that's open to debate. That's open to interpretation. That is subjective. Um, Ronaldo's won it playing for several. Not just, I think Ronaldo win it at Man United. I think he did. Um, well, you could argue, yeah, Ronaldo should have possibly won it in 2019. I think it was the year Luka Modric won it. So, but I still think it's a personality contest now, not necessarily the best all round player. I think it should go to the best all round player, or the player who's put in the best, most consistent performances. The fact a goalkeeper made the top 10 is one thing, but Robert Lewandowski playing in a more competitive league, and then people go, well, Bayern Munich win all the time. They don't win all the time. They don't win every single trophy that the German teams play for. He's scored 111 goals in 2 years. Like, how has he not got the Ballon d'Or? Um, you know, that is a travesty. But I think everyone has their opinion. It is subjective. I don't know how the Ballon d'Or voting process works. I'll hold my hand up and say that I don't know everything about all sports. I'm not a complete sports buff entirely. There are things that I find out about sports that surprise me. Um, but yeah, questions have to be asked about the voting process. Like, what are the criteria to be on the short list? What's the criteria to be considered? Um, Is it the amount of games played? Do you have an Ironman streak in there? If you miss no games, if you play every single minute of the season, does that get put into consideration in the 12-month period because it's from January to December or November? How they work out, I don't know. So there's a fair few questions to ask about the criteria to be in the top 10, the top 20, the top 100. How they break down who wins what. Is it voted by journalists? Is it voted by professional players? Um, then you have to ask the question: what is the voting process? What is the 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 criteria to be put on the Ballon d'Or top 100? A whole host of things. What is my favourite sport? I've done a video on my favourite sports, and it's basically ice hockey's first, rugby league second, rugby union third. Um, Although rugby union is slowly dropping down, and rugby league, I have some question marks about the future direction of the sport. For me, ice hockey is just, well, hockey, depending on where you are in the world. The NHL is my favourite league. Um, Best Juventus team in history, I think that's a difficult one. That's a very difficult one. You put me on the spot there. I mean, I remember watching Juventus in the 90s when Serie A was exceptionally competitive when it was on free to air TV in this country. So that's a very, very difficult one. But when Zidane's played for them, Platini, they've had some great players play for Juventus. Pavel Nedved, I think, for me, is one of the best midfielders of all time. Um, you know, uh, just Nedved would make my fantasy 11. But when you've got players like Zidane and Nedved playing for them, Del Piero is another one of my favourite players that I grew up watching. They've had some pretty good players. I wouldn't be able to tell you my best Juventus team in history because I've only watched Italian football since 1992. So therefore, I've only watched 29 years of Italian football, and I haven't watched it religiously since about 2008, 2009. So I couldn't really tell you my best team because I haven't watched it consistently through that period. Um, and you know, the majority of my watching of Serie A was the 90s and the 2000s. So that again limits what I can put as okay the best Juventus team because that was a very competitive Serie A period in the league's history. A lot of teams were competing at the top. You had a great Parma side, Crespo, Adriano, a young Buffon before he goes to Juventus. You had a solid Fiorentina side with Batistuta in there. Napoli were up and down. They were good at the start of the 90s and then wobbled a bit and come back. AC Milan, had brilliant players. Just AC Milan, Inter with Ronaldo, the original Ronaldo, and Zanetti. You had, you know, some really good sides. Uh, okay, let's have a look. Let's have a look. Do I think the League One in France is unfair at the moment? PSG? Yes. The other teams in the French league structure in the top two divisions have gone. We need to restrain spending and live within our means. PSG are doing exactly the opposite because of basically state ownership from Qatar. Um, Lille winning last year, I think, was a real positive moment uh, in for the league, but it's the weakest out of the top five leagues in Europe, and it has been for quite some time. Only one French side's ever won the Champions League, and that's Marseille. And that was at a time with a backdrop of match fixing scandal and corruption. And the other French clubs just don't have, even AS Monaco, who are like the second wealthiest team in France, again with a billionaire owner with stupidly deep pockets, is saying we've got to constrain spending, we've got to live within our means. Uh, the owner's like, I'm not going to spend money just hand over fists. So that tells you something that the second wealthiest club in French football are going, yeah, we're not going to overspend. We're going to be sensible. The best French players don't play in France for the majority. So there's an issue there. The best French talent plays in other leagues, apart from Mbappe. Um, so that, again, says that the league is not great. Yeah, it's worrying when you've got a team that just buys the league, basically, and the occasional blip season like a Lille winning. Um, yeah, it's not good for the competitiveness. It's not good for the health of the sport, and football in France is not a dominant sport. The viewership figures, if you look at French TV and what French sports fans like, it's a pretty varied split between a lot of sports, which take a fair chunk of the TV revenue and fan membership or club membership and participation. Football isn't necessarily as dominant in France as people think. Um, Rugby union, rugby league are very, very popular as well. Cycling, obviously the Tour de France, it's religion in France. The alpine sports, ice hockey, for example, skiing, uh, speed skating, a whole variety of other sports have a lot of interest from fans. So that's something to bear in mind when we're discussing the French league. There's issues with the TV deal. During COVID, it collapsed, so that's a lot weaker than the other four major leagues. And the Portuguese league's got a pretty good TV deal as well, and is very very popular in the US because of the Latin community in the US. Um, and the Portuguese league is I think a bit more competitive than the French league, which is kind of worrying because there's less teams in the Portuguese league system. There's less player base. It's a smaller population size. There's less money in the Portuguese league, and they are a more competitive league. But I think a lot of the European leagues, outside, even in all, not to talk in the top five, are more competitive for when you look at titles, where they go, who wins what. Um, so yeah, the, the French league is not as competitive. I think Serie A is the second best league, and the German league are about equal. for the second best. La Liga's has got problems. There's a lot of money issues with Spanish football. It's not just Barcelona and Real Madrid. Oh yeah, I think Serie A is far more competitive than La Liga. Um, there's also money issues within Italian football as well. You know, um, Italian football is not immune from clubs constantly collapsing and being reformed. It's on a daily basis in Italy, but the league is more competitive and it's got more depth to it. More people play it at grassroots. It's more popular. It's like a national sport over there. Very similar to here. La Liga's got a lot of problems. It's not just Barcelona, Real Madrid. Valencia are basically bankrupt as well. That's another big club in Spain. They can't finish their stadium rebuild that's been going on for 20 years. The contractors haven't been paid for forever. Work has completely stopped. Um, so yeah, I think Serie A is definitely more competitive than it has been for the last 10, 15 years. It struggled for a bit following the 2006 match fixing scandal. It's recovered, which is a positive. Um, and yeah, like the rise of Atalanta and Sassuolo, I think has helped the league. Inter breaking Juventus's dominance. Juventus having problems is not necessarily a bad thing for Italian football, but um, it's their second corruption scandal within 15 years. So questions have to be asked about uh, that club, the ownership, um, the dealings going on financially, which are troubling and very very worrying for the league going forwards. But Italian football could, go back to the pinnacle of where it was in time. But the UK is where the wealthiest clubs are at. Reality. Let's be honest about it. You know, the Premier League is a revenue driver, um, massive revenue driver in comparison to the other European leagues because of the popularity in the US market, um, which has driven the growth of the Premier League financially for the last 15 years, 15, 20 years. And David Beckham going over to play for LA Galaxy all those years ago has really increased the drive for the Premier League. Look at the amount of American money in English football in all the leagues. Um, I mean, even Wrexham has got North American money. I mean, Ryan Reynolds is obviously Canadian, but based out of the US. So there's Canadian and US money flowing into the Premier League and the league structure in England more so than the other leagues, simply because of how ownership works, and ownership rules, and the German league is a little bit more conservative in its ownership, more fan involvement. But you just have to look where the money's coming from. The overseas investment, is that all necessarily good for football? I don't know. There's definitely a wealth imbalance, and the TV deal could be better. So we'll see what happens. Do you think Juventus will ever be back as Champions League favourite? We'll see. We'll have to see what happens with this investigation into them. This European Super League idea is going to be, well, we now know why. Juventus are having this investigation into their financial dealings, and Barcelona and Real Madrid are basically bankrupt. Doesn't matter how good they do in the league this season, they've got money problems. And that La Liga is looking very, very topsy turvy this season. So we'll see what happens. But Barcelona have got massive debts. Real Madrid have got massive debts. They're not letting go of the European Super League idea, but now we know why. Is the Premier League the biggest sports league in the world? If so, by how much? That is a difficult question because I think the big four North American leagues have massive revenues themselves. The NFL and NBA, like astronomical revenues. The NBA players are the highest paid on average in the world, with some stupidly massive contracts. The NFL is a license to print money. The Premier League, I think, it's an interesting one. I don't know how biggest sports league in the world. The Premier League is more of a global brand than Major League Baseball or the NHL. But when it comes to the NBA and NFL, they're also very popular globally as well. The NBA is actually very, very popular in Australia and in some of the European markets and countries because basketball is obviously very popular on on the European continent as a sport. The NHL is very popular in Europe again because it's the second most popular sport continent wide in Europe for players, fan attendance, TV deals, the lot. Um, but on saying that, the US, Canada, and Mexico will be hosting the next World Cup after Qatar. I think the Premier League is a major driving force behind that, with the uptake of kids and teenagers playing the game, the growth of the game with fan base, the growth of the MLS is partly driven by the interest in the Premier League. Um, the amount of NHL broadcasts I've watched where they're advertising Premier League games mid-match and they're discussing, Liverpool playing Man United or an FA Cup game or even Championship football and League One and League Two football. Um, it doesn't matter if it's the Premier League or the English league structure is very, very popular overseas. Now, is that good for the game domestically? That is another question because we as fans over this country are getting, and I think this is quite common across fan bases, are getting very, very annoyed for kickoff times being changed for overseas markets for TV audience. The overseas market, we are very, very frustrated. We cannot watch the 3 o'clock traditional kickoffs here in the UK on TV because there's a TV blackout, but you in America can. So if you're on the East Coast, that's what, 11 o'clock in the morning, 10, 11 o'clock in the morning. You can watch basically our biggest games, but we can't. That is frustrating. Um, then you have the early lunchtime kickoff and the evening kickoff. Again, that's for the overseas TV market. That's not for fans in this country. That is, and if you're, I mean, it is frustrating, massively, massively frustrating. Um, so while it's possibly the biggest global sporting brand worldwide, it doesn't necessarily benefit the domestic fan base. There is a lot of frustration in the direction the league and the sport in general is taking. Um, yeah, we have the 3 p.m. blackout. It's designed to protect attendance, apparently. Yeah, protect attendance. Um, well, that's laughable, quite frankly, because they lifted the blackout with the resumption of play last year after COVID and towards the end of last season. Um, and yeah, we have the blackouts, and it's really frustrating. And that's a thing that's been put in place for years with the broadcasters. But you guys in the US and Canada can watch these games. You can watch those games. It is absolutely frustrating. And they changed the evening kickoff times to the Friday night games are ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Yes, the UK is far smaller as a country than the US. There's far less travel distances necessarily, obviously. Um, but you know, that's still a lot of Americans are going. But the UK is so small. Everyone lives, and a lot of Americans believe we all live in London. And we all talk really posh English. Not the case. Um, to get from London to Liverpool, I mean, the furthest away day that I can think of in English football is Plymouth Argyle playing against Carlisle in the lower leagues. Well, that has been a lower league fixture in the past. Or Leighton Orient playing Carlisle, for example, a team right at the north of England, a team right at the south of England. That's one of the longest away days. So yeah, that's ridiculous. Juve, Real Madrid, or Barcelona, who's in the best position and who's worst? I think Barcelona. We know about their financial problems. That's a massive issue they have, and they're limited. They've got no transfer budget, so they're going to be selling players basically and promoting youth. But Real Madrid, they haven't necessarily disclosed their financial issues. I think they are a wealthier club than Barcelona, for you know, historically, with a slightly bigger fan base. But they haven't disclosed their debts, whether they're as big or smaller. I don't know. Juventus are having their own investigation with some creative accounting. I don't know if there's a best or worst position now. I think they're all equally in trouble. They're the 3 clubs that are still sticking to this European Super League. Now we know why. All of it's to do with money, mismanaging the money, and being investigated for mismanaging the money. I have no sympathy for any of the 3 clubs. Do I feel sorry for their fans? Somewhat to a point, although their fan bases are pretty toxic, so I have no sympathy really. Um, I think it's a good thing for the wider European game. They do suffer a bit. Other clubs have basically had their own financial issues, and it is what it is. I wouldn't say Juventus, Real Madrid, Barca are the top three biggest clubs right now because they're all broke. How are you doing? Got a question on, on pressing. Do you think it's a must to have a high intensity press, or do you think defensive is playable at the top level? Organisation helps and spatial awareness. As long as you've got a quick pace counter attack and fast players, you can play a structured defensive game. Um, um, is it playable at the top level? It all depends how you've set up and what formation you're setting up and the players you have at your disposal. If you stay within your structures, then yes, you can do it. The high press only works if every player buys into that high press system. If the press starts breaking down and it's not done as unison, then the high press can be, as the Albania England game proved. They went with the high press, but they didn't all press in the same way. They were doing it in ones and twos. So it doesn't matter the level you're playing at, the top level or the lower levels. If you're playing with a high press, all the players have to buy in. If you're playing with a structured defence, not necessarily full on defensive, but a structured defence with a fast counter attack, again, you have to have pieces in play for that to work. You should never try and play for a draw. You should always try and win. But I do think a defensive football, if it is done right, yes, it is playable at the top level. We've seen it done. It all depends on where you're. As long as your defensive back three or back five or back four aren't basically defending in the 16, 18-yard box, but are in between the halfway line and the D, um, yeah, you can congest the midfield and just make it bodies, and it's all about positional sense. I think Juve fan base is toxic. There's a toxic element to the Juve fan base. Um, there is a toxic element with any fan base. I don't think they're necessarily as toxic as Real and Barca, but there is a toxic element there. But we've seen it in every football fan base has it, whether it's the ultras or hooligans or just real bad on social media. Every fan base has that toxic element. I think Real Madrid and Barca are worse, but Juve does have a toxic element. There is no denying that, in my opinion. But no, I guess top teams tend to try and spurge on attack talents and other end up playing really defensive players. Um, that's an interesting one. It all depends on the style of play that the manager wants, and high press really works if you've got quicker players up front and energy in midfield. Defensive structures can work, um, as long as if you're going to be not pressing in the final third, congest the midfield and then start your defensive play in your defensive third. It can work. We've seen it at international level. We've seen it in Italian football for many years. Um, so it's doable. It varies from the system to system. Some systems suit balanced play, other systems suit a high press, other systems suit more defensive structure play with fast counter attack. Each system is different, and each playing squad is different, and each individual player is different. As long as the players who are playing that system buy in, it should work. Any system can work and win you games, whether you win 5-3 or 1-0. So you could have very open end to end, which can that consistently win you trophies or be successful. You could have total football where you've got interchangeable positions in a system, or you have a very structured defensive team that snatches the odd goal by basically defending their socks off, and then one or two attack-minded players hit the opposition on a counter attack when the opposition are getting frustrated. Any system can win you games. The fact that certain fact the fact that people fans are expecting every game to be thrilling and entertaining are going to be sorely mistaken. Sometimes it's pragmatic that wins you games. Um, you're not going to get free flowing matches every single game. I think the best teams are those who adapt their tactics to suit the situation. It depends on what the opposition do as well and how they set up. It depends on what players are available with fitness, suspension, and illness, and squad rotation. Um, so you can't just play one system. You have to be vary from plan A, plan B, plan C. You have to be tactically astute. You have to mix things up. Um, I just like seeing exciting games. You're not going to see it every game. There are some games that you just go, it's going to be a ball 0-0. And other games are thrilling 5-all draw like West Brom against Man United in Alex Ferguson's last game, where defending just didn't happen that day. Um, so it all varies really, quite honestly, on the system and the team you're playing. You sometimes have to play the conditions as well. Conditions can go right. It's going to be really heavy rain, or there's a bit of snow in the air. It could be a very damp pitch, a boggy pitch. It could be a very fast playing surface. It could be a very muddy playing surface because we've seen that before. Um, it could be an uneven playing surface. It could be a very windy day, so maybe long balls aren't effective or crosses get disrupted, so more playing on the ground. It could be a very hot day, so you slow your pace down a little bit because of heat fatigue. So the weather conditions have an impact on how a game is played as well. You have to play the conditions as well as the opposition, and the referee might not necessarily like some of the tackles going in, so you have to be adaptable in your game. And I think players as professionals need to adapt their game accordingly. The best teams generally have very flexible systems where at periods in games they might go just structured defence, and other periods they may go for the high press, and other periods they might have a more of a balanced game where they're trying to win the midfield battle. Um, where would Juve, Real Madrid, Barca come in the Premier League at this current time? Don't know. I don't. I honestly don't know at this current time. I think uh, they would be in the top half of the table. But again, that's a hypothetical question. Speaking of service loss, you go to basically the ball parts. Well, look, Burnley Tottenham didn't take place, and that's only up the road from Manchester is Burnley. It's not that far away. I mean, slightly higher up altitude wise, and a bit further north. Um, I'm surprised more games didn't get called off with the weather conditions we had over the weekend. We are predicted to have more wintry weather coming in the following weeks. So it'll be interesting to see over the festive period how the weather affects games, but also COVID, also coronavirus pandemic, how that will impact. Because this time last year, so many teams were in protocols, so many players were, testing positive. Coaches, games were postponed not because of the weather, but because of illness. Um, And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of the modern Premier League pitches and Championship pitches have undersoil heating. A lot of investment by clubs throughout the football pyramid, even into the non-league, have really updated their playing surfaces. On saying that, yes, I haven't seen any of the footage. I've seen the weather conditions at Turf Moor over the weekend. I am surprised. Only I think 3 games in total were postponed because of the weather. 2 were in, I believe, League One, and 1 Premier League game. So I am surprised with how few games got called off in England, considering when those games are going to be refixtures. Time will tell when the Premier League can refixture the Burnley Tottenham game, and when I think they're both League One games. Maybe I think a League Two game as well was postponed. There was a handful, nowhere near the numbers that were postponed due to COVID. Um, well, yeah, it's you've got to be flexible in your approach, how you set up, and you've also got to remember the opposition will make tactical changes as well throughout a game. You'll never see a team that's, let's say, they might start with a 4-4-2 or 4-3-3 or a 5 at the back or 3 at the back, 2 wing backs, or occasionally rarely you see a sweeper floating around. So you have that hybrid formation. Formations will change throughout the game. Players will interchange positions, where you might see a right wing back going to the left and vice versa. They may swap. Um, so a good manager will have tactical flexibility, and the best managers coach defensive structures and allow the attacking players a little bit more freedom with what they do, and good set plays. I mean, I've seen some teams snatch a 1-0 win by their only shot on target, and they're facing 15, 16, 17 shots on target the other end. So you do sometimes get that where a team just burgles. The term burgles or snatches a win. I think The weather conditions. Look, the Man City game. You could, as you say, you could barely see the ball. You could barely see the pitch. I have seen a fair few games where there's a lot of snow and bad conditions, but the undersoil heating stops the pitches from freezing, which is a positive that we didn't have 20, 30 years ago. There are still some stadiums that do struggle with bad weather and drainage or pitches freezing or accessibility to games. But I am surprised more games weren't called off. Um, every time it snows, I do have concern, especially in the further north you go, the snow is generally heavier. Although in some parts of the south of England, we had a fair bit. We had a little dusting here, but 5, 6 miles up the road, Reading had a fair dumping, and Oxfordshire had a fair dumping. So I am surprised more games weren't affected and called off. But that's the hit and miss kind of issue we face with the weather conditions, where it could be raining 5 miles down the road, it'll be snowing 5 miles the other way, and we've had it where it's been snowing up the road up that way to the west, and to the east it's been raining. Or in the summer we had some thunderstorms where 3 miles down the road there was a thunderstorm and nothing was happening to the west, where I am. So I live in a weird area where it can be raining heavily here, and then 2 miles to the west where I used to live, or 3 miles to the west where I used to live. I used to live about 5, 6 miles away technically, but the next town down, there's no bad weather at all. Uh, he's getting wins. You look at the result sheet basically for matches played to wins loss ratio. He's got one of the best win loss ratios for an England manager. The style of play we play best when we're playing at pace. The Albania game was the first half was the best I've seen England play under Southgate, and the best performance for England since 2001 when we beat Germany 5-1 in Munich. It's getting that consistency of play like that every game, or as many games as but like 9 games out of 10. But yes, the second half against Albania was terrible. And you could argue some of his tactical changes, some of the substitutions. Um, the San Marino game, we just kept the intensity up against weak opposition, admittedly. Um, but it was a more all-round performance with a lot of changes. So the players buy into the system, but at times, yes, we do drop the intensity, um, and we allow the game to meander with no real purpose, and that is a problem. I'm not sold on us defensively, and I'm not sold on the goalkeeping position that we have right now. I'm not sold on Pickford as England's number one. I'd rather have Ramsdale in goal or another England goalkeeper like Pope, Heaton, Foster is still playing for Watford. So there are some good England goalkeepers out there who have a higher save percentage and make less mistakes. But Southgate wants to go with a sweeper keeper kind of dynamic, and not every keeper is a sweeper keeper. Their job is to keep the ball out of the net, not to be like a show off like Rene Higuita. So England have the FA have decided to extend his contract. That's fair enough. I've got no problem with that because we are getting results. We've been to a semi-final and a final. They are slowly taking that next step. We've got a good production line of youth players right now, so that in itself is a positive. Saying that, there is this debate, say with Belgium as well under Martinez, the win now. You've got the players you have to win now. Is the window closing on a group of players? Definition of a sweeper keeper. Okay. Basically, there is a position in football called the sweeper, which is a deep line defensive midfielder who can also be a deep secondary deep lying centre back, which basically means your team will not be playing the offside trap. It also takes pressure off the keeper for coming out for the through ball. So when in possession, you become a defensive midfielder, and you can start attacks. Once you've started that attack, you then drop back behind the back four push up, or the back three, and you just drop back and you sit deep, normally in your own half. Your job is basically to break up play, to either screen the back four or drop behind the back four, depending on what system you're playing with the sweeper. So you basically, a player who should be a sweeper is David Luiz, because he's basically a midfielder. He plays centre back. So you're meant to have a bit more skill than your other defenders and a bit more pace. And basically, you're there just to sweep up loose balls, take pressure off the goalkeeper. You're not playing the offside trap, so you're not pushing your defensive line stupidly high, and basically, yeah, you switch defensively in and out. Um, a lot of coaches now are taking dropping the sweeper from a position altogether, and they're expecting the keeper to come out and play with his feet a lot, and play further up the field. So Manuel Neuer is a prime example of a sweeper keeper. Jordan Pickford's a poor man's Manuel Neuer. Oblak, Jan Oblak, who plays for Atletico Madrid. René Higuita is the best sweeper keeper, actually. Well, yeah, I don't know with Southgate. I'm not sold on how England play under him. Um, we played best on a counter attack at pace, but we haven't got the defensive stability to do that. We haven't got the defensive quality to absorb 70% possession from the opposition and then attack them quickly. In possession, we're too slow and methodical. The best I've seen of England is that first half against Albania in the last international break. I've never seen an England team possession since 2001, maybe 2002, play that well. Maybe even the mid 90s. That was both the best England performance for 20 years, for 45 minutes, and then they stopped playing. Um, yeah, I've heard there's been a lot of players collapsing. There was a Wigan player who collapsed during training as well. Um, we are seeing a lot of this lately, and there's a lot of conspiracy theorists saying, "Oh, it's got to be the vaccine." Oh, blah, blah, blah. No, Bielsa, the Leeds manager, has raised concerns about player welfare and the fixture list and the fixture congestion. Um, and basically, the 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 workload the players are under. We've seen it in the NHL with Bomeister collapsing on the bench a couple of years ago, and basically he had a heart attack. Basically, Jan Bomeister. So it has happened in a variety of sports, but football seems, for some reason, Christian Eriksen in the summer, and now a whole host of players this season have gone down, and we've seen it with Sergio Aguero, Barcelona. We've seen it, yeah, Adama Traore, Fleck. Um, they seem to come in clusters. It's a very rare occurrence, but I do think we're going to have to see better screening for heart problems for all sportsmen. It is compulsory in Italy, and that has actually reduced cardiac arrest deaths and severe health issues. Um, yeah, it is concerning. There's the conspiracy theories going around. Oh, it's got to be to do with the vaccine. Da, 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 da. It'll be interesting to see how many of these players actually have had the COVID virus or flu and haven't realised they've got it because they've got a pretty decent immune system. But uh, flu viruses or any kind of COVID virus, because ironically, flu is related to the current virus pandemic, they attack your airways and your respiratory system. A Welsh rugby player about 20 years ago died of a heart attack when he had flu and he went to training and he collapsed in his house. Uh, um, no, we've seen heart issues with professional athletes before. We've seen it in cricket, we've seen it in football, we've seen it in rugby, we've seen it in ice hockey. There are plenty of high-profile athletes before the COVID pandemic who had heart problems. Um, it's nothing new, but medical screening has improved. But when you've got high-profile coaches like Bielsa, the Leeds manager, going, I have concerns about the amount we're forcing players to play and the fixture congestion and all that. He does have a point. And the sports I like the most, rugby league and ice hockey. Ice hockey, you can play 4 or 5 games in a week. You can play 2 back-to-backs, have a break, have another 2 back-to-backs, and another game. You can play 5 out of 7 days. It has been done. It's not advisable, but it has been done. Basically, you average 4 games a week playing in the NHL. Rugby league, you can have a 4 or 5 day turnaround. Same with rugby union. But there is something. There seems to be a spate of them, especially in professional football. But we've seen there was a young, I forget the cricketer. He's an England cricketer. He now does commentary for Sky. He had a medical, and you know he basically had a heart attack, and he was told to retire immediately. Manuel Almunia, for all the funny memes about Manuel Almunia and a bit of some of his calamitous goalkeeping, pretty good, decent goalkeeper there. He was obviously free agent from Watford, wanting to sign with Cagliari because the Italian system is so strict by law and insurance as well. He had the medical, and his agent said, "No, stop." And the club went, "No, you've got a heart problem. You will die if you don't get this treated." He was like, "What? We found an undiagnosed heart issue. Um, you failed your medical. You were not allowed to play professional football." He was retired on the spot. Um, because he has never played in Italy. The Italian system is so strict. If he was going for a medical at an Italian club, he would have failed. Christian Eriksen will never play football again. Basically, they'll pay out his contract, but he will never play again. But yes, it is concerning. Daley Blind is another one. He is still playing, but he collapsed in the Dutch league game, so it's different. And he was caught much earlier when he was having problems. But Aguero is the biggest name and Christian Eriksen are the two biggest names. But it is concerning that we've had such a rise in players struggling. Now, is it because of the disrupted seasons we've had? Are there much wider issues? Are the players being pushed too hard? It is amazing to me that like sports like rugby union and rugby league and ice hockey seem to have less of these issues. These other physical contact sports are having less of these problems. But questions do have to be asked, especially with professional football. It seems to be worse now. Ice hockey, you're on the ice for like 30 seconds to a minute and a half at a time. Then you change over, you sit down for a couple of minutes. You constantly rotate on shifts. Rugby union, rugby league, there's lots of stoppages in play, especially in rugby union. So you can have long periods where you're not running around. Rugby league as well, there is long periods where you're not running around. There could be an injury, there could be a breakdown in play. Um, Football seems to you're constantly on the go. You can have lengthy spells without a whistle. So the sports are all different, but football seems to have the majority of these heart issues or circulatory issues because breathing as well. Um, so the questions do have to be asked um, about what is going on. Um, so it's a troubling one, but football seems to have the bigger issue right now when it comes to the professional top flight sports globally. Um, Boomeister, for example, that was a really rare event. Another player, Pavlek, who used to play for the Jets and Thrashers franchise in the NHL, he did collapse as well during a game, and he had an arrhythmia, and he had to take medication. Mario Lemieux famously has a heart problem and still played on with medication. So you can manage heart conditions, but it is worrying for me as a sports fan in general that football seems to have this issue. Now, I haven't, obviously, I've got to do some paperwork in a minute, so I won't be online for much longer. Oh, what have I got to do? Yeah, so I've got to do some paperwork in a second, so I will have to end the stream in a bit. But from a medical perspective, I am scratching my head, but I'm not a medical professional. I've got friends who've got heart conditions who have to be very, very careful. One of my friends, he was in his early 20s, had to have a stint put in. And I'm not joking, he was, I think, 21 and basically collapsed from a heart attack. I've had low blood pressure and I had to be very, very careful this summer. I was very unwell this summer. But from a overexertion can cause it. Um, but the questions do have to be asked about the physical strain they're putting on their bodies. It is very, very worrying that there is such a spate of these happening, especially in football, in the European leagues. Yeah, Christian Eriksen. But things seem to happen in bunches. I will say that. I will say this. They do seem to happen quite a lot together, and then it seems to be going quiet again. You know, uh, but it is quite worrying that the numbers. that is still very, very rare. Look at you've got to think how many professional football players playing in Europe right now, for example, in all the professional leagues. So the top flight, second divisions, third divisions, throughout the professional, semi-professional league structures, how many registered players are actually playing league football across Europe at any given time on any given weekend or midweek game? Um, and to have six, that's a very low percentage. But I will argue that the distance covered has gone up, but the quality of it has gone down. We can argue that. I will agree with that. Yeah, for Fabrice Rwanda, he does actually have a medical condition. Why? He had a genetic flaw, and you know he's discussed that with his doctors and all that, and he's very very he's a very interesting story because he does a lot with uh, promoting uh, you know getting yourself tested if you think you have a genetic disorder, if getting your kids tested, um, medical research. He does a lot of charity work. His one is different because he had an underlying health condition he wasn't aware of genetically. Mark Vivian Foe is the one who died on the pitch in I think 2002 during an international. So again, it's very 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 we're talking tiny amounts, but again, it's a difficult topic to talk about, but it is deeply concerning, and no one's going to argue the players are far more professional in their diet, their preparation. They are fitter, they are faster, they are bigger. But are we pushing the players too far? And when you've got managers, as I say, like Bielsa coming out and saying, I actually have worries about player welfare. And but this is the thing, whenever I do, I mean, Iker Casillas collapsed during training as well a couple of years ago. Um, so there have been some high profile players, Christian Eriksen, uh, Sergio Aguero, and Iker Casillas. These are superstar. These are household names in European football, world football, in the last couple of years. I think Iker Casillas he collapsed in training 2 years ago. Christian Eriksen collapsing in front of a billion people on TV. Aguero going down in the league. These are concerning things. It doesn't matter what level you're playing at, but it is concerning. But they need to do studies on what all these players. Uh, they need to do the tests and work out why, what has caused them, what has caused these issues. Because there's got to be a correlation. There has to be some sort of like causal link, or it could be that they've got these undiagnosed health issues, and because the screening is not strict in other leagues, the Italian system is the best system. Never thought I'd be saying that, but the Italian sports system, when it comes to when doing a medical, signing a contract, doesn't matter what professional sport you're playing, they do a full health screen. If you have any health issue from heart to lungs, any health issue, it will come up straight away. They are the most intense screening. It's been that way for 20 odd years. It has reduced deaths and other long term health issues massively. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about the Ballon d'Or. I will finish on the Ballon d'Or. Messi has said Lewandowski should have won for the last 2 years. That in itself is a damning indictment on the system that we have in place for the Ballon d'Or. I don't know how they do the criteria to work out who finishes where on the Ballon d'Or voting. Maybe Robin Lewandowski doesn't get another opportunity. He might have, he might break his leg this season. He might lose form this season. He might not qualify. If he qualifies for the World Cup, that's different. If Poland qualify for the World Cup, they've got to win that playoff against Russia. If they qualify, that changes the dynamic completely. But 111 goals in 2 years. Benzema, I mean, he was found guilty of blackmail and got a suspended prison sentence last week. He should not even be allowed on the Ballon d'Or list. He's got a criminal conviction. Personal opinion. Um, Astori again, yeah, the Astori one. Again, club captain, high profile league, televised game, millions of viewers worldwide. Mark Vivian Foe was the first player to die on the pitch, basically, of a heart attack, and that was only 19 years ago. So 19 years, a story. Vivian Foe, Moamba, basically was legally dead for 75 minutes. He was technically dead. He came back from the dead. Christian Eriksen, and all these other players, Aguero, Fleck, uh, Traore, um, you can see us collapsing in training. There are concerns. Yeah, Everton are on a slide. What do you say? Their form has completely gone out the window. They are in trouble. Newcastle are the only team in English football not to have a win yet this season, but Everton are in trouble. Yes, we'll agree with that. Everton are in big trouble. Um, and but a couple of wins and the edge of the European places and the bottom of the relegation fight, a couple of wins really changes the dynamic. The only place it doesn't change the dynamic is for Newcastle and Norwich. Their goal difference is that bad. It doesn't matter if Burnley lose against Tottenham or get a draw, they're still third bottom because Norwich has got such a shocking for and against goal difference, and Newcastle's is the second worst. So Newcastle and Norwich are in real trouble. Burnley, possibly if they beat Tottenham, they're not out of the bottom three, but they give themselves breathing space over the bottom two. I think Norwich and Newcastle are done. Norwich will have shown more fight in the last couple of weeks, but Newcastle are in massive trouble. Yeah, it's been that way, for a while. Coman, Martinez, Sam Allardyce, the whole lot, the whole circus around lack of managerial stability, lack of direction. They haven't won a trophy since '95. They had a good team in the '80s and '90s, and they've squandered it. Since David Moyes has left, there's been no managerial stability. I mean, they had an FA Cup final in there, 2008. It's been lack of direction and recruitment, player development, player retention. They've had some great players play for them over the years, um, who played high level internationals and had great careers. But the last 12, 13 years has been a tale of misadventure, basically. David Moyes did a fantastic job with the club. I'm not denying that. Other managers before him did a great job as well. But they were a very, very good side. But yeah, since 2008, their last finals appearance in any competition, and they won the FA Cup in '95. But yeah, since 2008, they have been slowly declining, and it's been more rapid in recent years. It's not Benitez's fault. Ancelotti, not his fault. A better opportunity came along. Real Madrid wanted to appoint him. He'd worked there before, so he knows the club. And Ancelotti, it would have been nice to see him have success. It would have been, but unfortunately, Everton are in a mess of their own making with the ownership side of things and the lack of managerial stability and the lack of a clear plan and vision that other clubs seem to have, and a positive club culture as well. I look at it, and you look at the clubs that have had success since Everton last won a trophy. There's always a positive club culture there. There's always a bit of we're going to give the manager time, good youth development, good scouting, good recruitment, a good relationship with the fan base. So yeah, Tottenham are in an issue of their own making. Absolutely, an issue of their own making. Right, I'm going to call it there because I've got some tax paperwork to sort out. But thank you very, very much, obviously, for all your questions this evening. It's been much appreciated, as always. And I will have some more videos for you very, very soon. I need to take a shit.